Tonight, our special guest is Congressman Chris Van Hollen, who has represented the 8th Congressional District in Maryland for the past 14 years. He's the ranking member of the House Budget Committee, has served as the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee from 2007 to 2011, and is currently the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. The congressman, a former staff member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is a specialist in international policy. The son of a Foreign Service officer, he has lived and studied abroad for many years. So thank you, Congressman Van Hollen, for joining us today. Can you tell us about the early years growing up and living around the globe?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be with you today. Thanks for having me. My dad's family's from Baltimore City originally, but then my dad went into the Foreign Service. He first went into the Navy, met my mom, and then they really represented the United States overseas together as a Foreign Service family. So we lived in many different parts of the world: Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Turkey, which was, I think, a great experience growing up with people from different cultures. You really try to learn to put yourself in their shoes and see the world from different perspectives. Also gives you a great appreciation for the United States and the rights and freedoms we enjoy here.
Mm-hmm. Great. It sounds like a fascinating experience.
You know, it is, and I was maybe lucky in the countries I went to or the years that I was overseas, but it was an opportunity to grow up with people from other religions, other cultures, but always coming back home to home base. And one of the things that I guess was a good sign is I always was reluctant to move from one place to another, meaning that every place had provided a great experience. But home base was always back here in Maryland.
All right. For over half a century, the Peace Corps has provided volunteers an opportunity to serve around the globe. So recently, the Response Program allowed those in their mid-careers to take a short-term assignment. Can you tell us how that's going, and will that program be growing?
Sure. Well, first let me say something about the Peace Corps, because it's a great program opportunity to serve. I remember when my parents were serving overseas in Sri Lanka, the island country of Sri Lanka, one day going to a very remote village and going into a hut where it was very dimly lit, and there on the wall of the hut was a portrait of President John F. Kennedy. And the reason that portrait was there was because President Kennedy launched the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps had provided important services to that village in terms of better sanitation. They drilled some wells, worked on the sanitation system. So those villagers will forever remember the United States played an important role in their lives. And it's an important complement to U.S. military power to have the Peace Corps sort of express American power through our example, right. Not just through military force. Right. So the Peace Corps has done a lot of good things over the years. More recently, they developed the Peace Corps Response program. It's a little different than the traditional program where you just have volunteers who don't necessarily have a lot of skills and background. They have some, but not necessarily broad and deep expertise. The response program, I think, was originally designed in response to international crises where we wanted to send over trained nurses, doctors, real experts. So it's a little more flexible. You allow people to deploy for shorter periods of time, but it's been a great success and it's grown significantly. One of the early examples of the response program was actually in response to the tsunami that hit Sri Lanka, right. where I lived at one point, and Thailand and other places, and we wanted to be able to quickly dispatch people who had the expertise to really help those countries respond.
It sounds like a great opportunity, something a little bit different, but still being able to be involved with the Peace Corps.
That's exactly right, and it works best when people have some idea before a crisis hits that they'd be interested in serving and helping, people who are the victims of some kind of natural disaster. And so the Peace Corps maintains a list of people with the skills that they've got, and depending on the nature of the crisis, they can deploy them. But it's not only crisis deployment now, but that is still a big part of it.
So let's talk a bit about Sustainable Development Goals. What are they, and provide a little bit of information about it?
Well, the Sustainable Development Goals are primarily goals that were established by the United Nations as to different targets we need to meet if we want to continue to coexist with the environment around us. I mean, one that obviously gets a lot of attention is dealing with greenhouse gases and global climate change. I mean, we're experiencing right now as we talk some of the hottest days on record here, and around the globe, it's been 14 of the last 15 years, I think it is, have seen the hottest temperatures on record around the world, and that's having huge impacts. And there's obviously a limit to how much carbon dioxide pollution humans can spew into the air and still have a sustainable environment. So that's just one example, and there are others with respect to population and other things. But just trying to make sure that as the world population grows, it grows in a way that can continue to coexist with the planet.
Right, that makes sense.
Yep.
All right, we will be right back and discuss service in the U.S. and those opportunities with Congressman Chris Van Hollen. Congressman Van Hollen, in 2006, you were one of the primary authors of key amendments to the Teach for America Act, which authorized funding for teachers in the lower income and underserved communities. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, we've been talking a little bit about service opportunities overseas. It's really important also that people look at service opportunities right here in our country. We've got lots of challenges, and the more people we have engaged in public service and volunteering of their time and talent, the better able we will be to meet these challenges. So Teach for America was a program developed to try to encourage young people to get a background in teaching and to go into some of our schools where we've had the greatest challenges in terms of test scores, and schools that have not been able to meet some of the national or state standards. And the idea is when these students go into these settings that they'll be interested in keeping a career in the area of education. Some do, some don't, but overall I think it's been a very successful program, and benefited the students and also the people who have these experiences. So Teach for America, again, at one point it was funded, and this is what you were referring to, we had a separate authorization, in other words, a specific program set up to fund Teach for America. Congress has since done away with what are called earmarks, which are targeted funds for specific purposes. And so rather than have funding that goes specifically to Teach for America, we've set up a competitive pool of funds. It's called SEED for short, but the idea is whether it's Teach for America or some other educational training program or program to send people into schools to teach, they have to compete every year. I mean, Teach for America has been successful in competing for funds in that process. But the idea is pretty straightforward, that we need more young people focused on education and working to make sure that we go into every community in this country and close many of the education gaps that we've seen. And this is not something you do overnight. It's a long-term process. We also, beyond Teach for America, we need to fund our education programs. And the very first piece of legislation I've introduced, and one I continue to introduce until we get it passed, is a bill to fully fund our elementary and secondary education programs to the level that we say is necessary. Right now you have what are called authorized levels, which are the levels of funding that Congress thinks is necessary, and then you've got the actual levels of funding. There's a big gap, and so my proposal is to close that gap to make sure the funding catches up with the authorized levels that set the standard.
Right, it sounds like a really good goal.
And we've got to get it done. You know, Maryland passed something years ago called the Thornton Commission legislation. I was very involved in that during my time in the state legislature. It says education is a priority. Here's what it will cost to try to make sure every child, regardless of their neighborhood, can get a good education. And you know, Maryland's made great progress, but we have a long way to go. And nationally, we need to do that.
Absolutely.
So.
Great. Numerous programs are part of the Corporation for Community National Service. So what are some of the options available for that?
So this is the entity that was set up by the federal government to encourage people who are volunteering and really to provide guidance to them as to what opportunities there are out there and also to stimulate more volunteer activity. So AmeriCorps is probably the best known program where people sign up for AmeriCorps, they get training, and then they're usually deployed to certain nonprofit organizations around the country. And they really have a multiplier effect. It's not that they go out and necessarily start their own organization, but they provide excellent support, guidance, and resources to nonprofits that are already based locally, that already understand the local challenges. And AmeriCorps volunteers provide just a little bit more know-how. There's a sort of a paid staff person who can then encourage more volunteers to come to an organization. And so they've really helped build a lot of volunteer organizations, nonprofit organizations around the country. And within AmeriCorps, you've got a lot of other programs. You've got the Conservation Corps program, which is a little different model. It's a residential model. Sometimes they're deployed to areas where FEMA has gone, for example, after a natural disaster. There are programs for getting seniors more involved, or for people who want to provide services to seniors. So there are lots of other opportunities, but under the whole umbrella of the national service programs. AmeriCorps is one of them.
Okay, so it has a lot of support, but then it also has some detractors. So for example, Newt Gingrich had tried to kill the program before it started. So how else has it been useful in the United States? Because it has a 20-year history. So it's going into these different organizations and helping these areas. What are some other things that it does?
Well, what it does is provide, again, that sort of resource support, some of the seed staffing for programs. So there are programs, for example, AmeriCorps Vista, that is primarily in lower income areas, helping nonprofits when it comes to providing more after-school programs, so that kids, when the bell rings, they're not out on the streets. There are programs that are designed to make sure that they are engaged in productive activities, and so that's just one example. You've got others, as I mentioned, that help seniors. I mean, you've got a lot of seniors who need help and support just to go about their daily living, in many cases, in fragile situations. So you've got other programs to help them. So I think that the track record of AmeriCorps and these other programs has been very good. There is a focus, as there should be, on accountability and transparency, trying to make sure that we look at where the money's gone, and if the money is not being well spent, that program should be canceled. But for the most part, those funds have leveraged private sector funds and contributions to help nonprofits that provide important services in the communities. I mean, we're in Montgomery County. There are lots of important nonprofits in Montgomery County that help with food programs, housing programs, healthcare programs, education mentoring programs, and you know the taxpayer gets a lot of benefit from the volunteer efforts there, because these are people who are volunteering their time, talent, and energy to these efforts, and that funding just provides a little bit of seed funding, because you have to have somebody who's always there, always answering the phones. But by having that money and those resources, you can provide the ongoing and much bigger efforts with the volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we'll take a short break and continue our discussion with Congressman Chris Van Hollen.
Someone you know, someone in your town, at your school, or where you work, is suffering from Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Living with Crohn's or colitis means managing excruciating pain, a lifetime of medication, and days when they can't even get out of bed. Every day can be emotionally and physically exhausting. In fact, more than 1.4 million Americans are struggling with these chronic diseases. This year alone, 70,000 more will be diagnosed. Chances are someone you know has Crohn's or colitis. Someone like me. I'm Amy Brenneman, and I support the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America. CCFA was created to help millions of us cope and to find cures. We all just want to get back on our feet and back to our lives. You can help by volunteering, donating, or joining us at an event. Help someone you know get back on their feet and back to their lives. Visit ccfa.org today to learn more.
Serving your community is a great feeling. The Montgomery County Volunteer Center can connect you to hundreds of volunteer opportunities available throughout the area. Are you a student, senior, professional, community group, or business looking to serve? Simply visit our website to select what's right for you and help celebrate the 25th anniversary of Community Service Day by taking part in our Pledge 25 Challenge. The Montgomery County Volunteer Center. Make an impact in your community. Where will you serve?
For the last 14 years, Chris Van Hollen has been a member of Congress representing the 8th District from Maryland. He's the senior Democratic member of the Budget Committee and served for 4 years on the Democratic National Committee. Organizations like Teach for America and alliances such as Service Nation provide hope and opportunity for inner city children. How can viewers support and be a part of a nation of service?
Well, sure. Look, I encourage people to get involved in national service, and you can do it in many different ways. I mean, the AmeriCorps program is one way. To go to a sort of universal portal, so to speak, there is serve.gov. You can go there, and it creates a whole menu of options that people can search, so serve.gov. Here in Montgomery County, there are lots of service opportunities, and there's also an organization or a sort of portal called Montgomery Serves, montgomeryserves.gov. That people can go to and look at lots of ways they can help their neighbors here in Montgomery County. There are different service days that are set aside nationally that a lot of local jurisdictions like Montgomery County participate in. September 11th is one, so if people want to do something September 11th, they should go to montgomeryserves.gov or serve.gov nationally. And Dr. Martin Luther King Day is another. There are lots of opportunities. But again, this is a way people can help their neighbors. And there's always a need for people's talents and time. So I encourage them to do it. I mean, we're fortunate in this community that we have a lot of people that do want to volunteer their time, talents, and expertise.
All right. So the first session of the 114th Congress passed less than 1% of the bills introduced. Under this scenario, how can we hope to increase spending for education, service, and support to our communities?
Well, I'd be the first to agree that Congress has not been nearly as productive as we'd like to see it be. There have been spurts of productivity over the period of time that I've been there. When President Obama was first elected and sworn in, we passed the Economic Recovery Bill, we passed the Affordable Care Act, which today is providing affordable care to about 18 to 20 million Americans who did not have it before. We passed the Wall Street reform legislation, so some very important pieces of legislation passed. In terms of the resources that can be provided, we do have to pass, one of the things we have to pass every year as a Congress is the annual, what are called appropriations bills, the spending bills. When Congress doesn't pass that, bad things happen.
Right.
We saw the government shutdown a couple years ago. It was a scandalous chapter. I've worked very hard to end that and to prevent future government shutdowns. And I am pleased to say that despite all the polarization in politics, we've been able to provide at least I think a good amount of funding to some important priorities like Head Start, early education programs. But clearly going forward, if we're going to deal with major challenges like modernizing our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, building out broadband, we're going to have to make bigger investments in those areas. And I'm hoping that there'll be a greater spirit of cooperation. And I have always been one that has tried to work hard to reach across party lines to get things done.
And as a member of the Budget Committee, often a lot of the work is done behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the projects that you're most proud of during your tenure in the House of Representatives?
Well, you're right. I mean, the public, the media tends to focus on the major showdowns. I am pleased that we've been able to get some positive things done on a bipartisan basis. More recently, in the last year, we did reauthorize the education programs, the elementary and secondary authorization programs. We replaced the No Child Left Behind law from way back with legislation that kept the best of that law in terms of some of the accountability provisions, but also made changes to make things more flexible. We passed some mental health policy reforms. Personally, some of the things I've been most pleased to be part of have been, number one, getting the big banks out of the student loan program. They used to make sort of guaranteed huge profits, windfall profits off the student loan program, so taxpayers were really being taken to the cleaners. So we ended that practice, and now we use those resources for student loans, not to go to the big banks. I co-chair the Childhood Cancer Caucus and been proud to work on a bipartisan basis to provide more funds for childhood cancer research and treatment, and also teamed up with Republicans on whistleblower protection legislation. I mean, if you're in the government and you see someone who's engaged in wrongdoing or fraud, you should be able to come forward and report that without fear that you yourself will be retaliated against. So those are some of the things. And most recently, we passed something to help families who have kids with disabilities put aside a little funds to care for their kids when the parents are no longer there, because that is a big fear of a family who has a child with severe disabilities, is what happens when the parent's gone. And this provides the ability to put together funds in a tax-free account, just like the college savings accounts, right, except for your child with disabilities, and provides a little assurance and economic security. So those are some of the things that don't necessarily get the headlines, but they've been good, positive, bipartisan success stories.
It sounds like it. It sounds like a variety of different areas as well. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely not things that you hear about in the news every day. So it's great to hear that progress is being made in those programs.
Absolutely. I mean, we still have to make progress on some of these sort of big budget issues. I mentioned the challenge of modernizing our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We need a long-term solution for that. We need to do much more in terms of college affordability. I mean, we're still seeing kids graduate with huge debts. Yes, we got the big banks out of the equation, and they were racking up outrageous profits without any risk, by the way. But still, we have a long way to go. Child care costs, the cost of affordable child care, through the roof, and we still need an economy that works well for everybody. Right now we have an economy that works really well for some people, and they're doing just fine. But a lot of Americans, are struggling, to try to, put together wages that allow them to support their families. So a lot of work still to do, but I do think we need to also focus on some of the positive things we've seen happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
All right. Baby boomers are retiring, yet they want to be part of their community. They want to play an active role to encourage future generations of volunteers. Mm-hmm. So what is your advice, and how can they become involved?
Sure. Well, as part of the National Service Corporation, there's also a series of programs, one of them Senior Corps, because you're absolutely right. You've got a lot of people who've got incredible talent. These are people who've developed expertise over a lifetime who want to give back to their communities. So there are, again, if you go to serve.gov, you can find a listing of a lot of these programs. Here in Montgomery County, there's a program called Interages, which still exists. Interages, the idea being that seniors can help provide mentoring to younger people. And if you watch these programs at work, it is very heartwarming. I've seen seniors who are providing that mentoring, and first of all, it's great to see the kids' faces when they get the idea. And it's also great for the seniors, right, to see that their wisdom and their expertise is being put to good use. And obviously, with an aging population, the baby boomer population, we've got one of our greatest natural resources, which is the talent of these senior citizens who want to give back. They don't want to. They should enjoy their retirement, but they should also know that there are opportunities to enjoy their retirement by giving back to the community. And so, again, both Montgomery County, montgomeryserves.gov, and at the national level, serve.gov, will provide a good roadmap to some of the options that are out there for people.
Great. So it's definitely a win-win on both sides.
It is, and again, you see smiles on the faces both of the young people and the seniors when you've have them come together.
Yeah, exactly. All right, one final question.
Sure.
According to JFK's famous saying, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It seems to be lost in a bipartisan divide of our country. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, we've been spending our time talking about the importance of giving back, and I do think that Americans are a big-hearted people, and they really do want to give back to their communities and their country, whether it's overseas serving with the Peace Corps, which we talked about, and you mentioned JFK, as I said. The fact that the Peace Corps was in a remote village in Sri Lanka doing good things is why there was a portrait of John F. Kennedy on the wall of a hut half a world away. That same sort of effort should also be made here at home, whether it's in schools that have lots of challenges, helping with the homeless, helping with environmental cleanup. So there's a lot that we should all be doing, and this country's given us, so much, and it's important that people give back. And so I think they should always remember that charge from President Kennedy, which is that, don't ask simply what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
That's a great reminder.
It is.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Congressman Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us in Travel Television. I'm Carrie Keenan, and remember to share your stories of travel for a purpose.